was a very positive conversation. So we'll see how we move forward.
I think we had answers or ways to progress.
They committed to share our message of willingness to engage and to work on key areas of agreement, and that Canada would never be the 51st state.
The country's premiers put forward a united front during their visit to Washington last week, making their case with U.S. officials against Trump's tariff threats. Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc also met with Trump's Commerce Secretary nominee, Howard Lutnick. So is Canada making any progress on negotiations? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Catherine Levesque is a parliamentary reporter for the National Post in Ottawa, Emily Nicolas, a columnist for Le Devoir in Montreal, and Jason Markusoff, a producer and writer at CBC News, and he's in Calgary. Nice to see everyone. Let's talk about whether we're getting anywhere here with Donald Trump, or whether we're taking a bunch of trips down to Washington and we could be spending our money elsewhere. I don't know, Catherine, what did you make of the show of unity from the premiers together? I don't know what the measure of success was. I guess it's good that they got a meeting, they got in there, but what did you make of the visit?
Yeah, I think the fact that they got a meeting with White House officials, at the last minute, I think it was a win, but it was a win domestically, right? It showed that our premiers were able to secure a meeting with people who were close to Donald Trump to try to convey our message. Where I thought that the premiers kind of fell short a little bit is that they didn't have a clear plan, into what they were trying to tell Donald Trump and his staff exactly. I was listening to a British podcast yesterday with Anthony Scaramucci, who used to work for Donald Trump as Director of Communications in his first term, and he was saying, when you meet with Donald Trump, you need a clear plan. You need to have an agenda. You can't just do like he didn't talk about the premiers, but my understanding is you can't do what the premiers did exactly and just say, well, we're going to hear what Donald Trump thinks, and we're going to try to listen to his concerns and try to find a way to appease him. No, I think they should have had a clearer message for sure, and ultimately, I don't think it was a win in the U.S. Nobody really talked about the premiers being there in U.S. media. There was a briefing at the White House, and nobody brought that up either. Certainly a win domestically, but I don't think so in the U.S.
Emily, what do you think? Not only the premiers, but Minister Dominic LeBlanc has formed a relationship with the soon-to-be Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, and that seems to be, I can see how that will be helpful. I don't know that it's helpful yet, but I wonder what you think of the ability to influence people like that.
The thing is, we are facing a power that understands power. And what we are doing right now is trying to reason with power rather than trying to build a counter power. And that is the huge gap in the strategic response of Canada right now. Yeah. The most important thing you can do to react to Washington will be spending time outside of Washington. And so as far as reasoning with the barrel of a gun is possible, I think everything has been done. But to me, the most important thing that has been happening in the last couple of days is Justin Trudeau's trip to Europe, meeting with the Secretary General of NATO, meeting with European counterparts. That's where you build counterpower. I also think that the biggest flaw in the Canadian strategy is not being able to see, quote unquote, like-minded countries that are not European or North American. And it's been the case since Justin Trudeau's been in power, basically. And so we have had, over the last decade, spent very little energy building those equal to equal relationship with non-NATO, non-North American European countries. And it's showing, because if it wasn't for that, our reflex would also be to go directly to Mexico, directly to Panama, directly to Brazil, and trying to be a Canadian leader in the world, as we used to say that Canada used to be a great place in the world, and be a leadership in the sense of the continental American response to Donald Trump. Because what Donald Trump is doing, not just a threat to us, but it's a threat to the security in the Americas. And there is a place for Canada to play a role in the leadership for the Pan-American response to Donald Trump as a security threat to the continent. And we're not playing that role because we don't see those countries as our equal, it seems to be, or I don't know what else the reason is, but it's a serious security gap at this point that we are not taking our relationship with such a big power as Brazil, for example, seriously in the context in which we're in. And so we've done everything that we can do in DC. Let's move on and talk to everyone else who's also concerned with Donald Trump.
You've given that a lot of thought. I appreciate that analysis. There's lots of ideas there, and I think, Jason, Emily's right. I'm not hearing those ideas from the government. They seem to be very focused still on Washington and diplomatic efforts. I think some of that may be because the Prime Minister's only got 3 weeks left, but some of it may be because they still think that's the best play.
Well, I think so much of it is because it's staring us right in the face. And are there, trying to find different ways, are there ways that won't, completely, devastate Canada or, harm Canada's own interests, that we can avert this? If calling somebody the fentanyl czar and doing some border security things that a lot of people have been asking for to protect us from what's coming in from the States in the first place, will do it. That's good. I think the disconcerting thing is the sense that, what will come in the March threats and maybe the April threats will be greater sacrifices. Premier Danielle Smith in our province was suggesting on the radio yesterday that maybe she thinks that supply management of milk and dairy, milk, egg, and chicken, poultry products will be on the table first, to the extent that she's actually looking to talk to her agriculture minister about what kind of compensation plans they would have to do to end supply management. There are some are not talking as much about the mollifications or appeasements that Premier Danielle Smith is. Some are people talking more tough about tariffs and counter tariffs and counter retaliation. Certainly Susan Holt was from New Brunswick earlier. I think there's opportunities to do both at the same time, try to be diplomatic, try to prevent, but also try to respond. And I'm not sure anybody's quite talking about strike first tactics yet, but who knows that's coming down the pike.
And Catherine, at some point, though, that does have to be the response too. I mean, maybe you have to wait for the tariffs to be put in place to strike back, but it does feel like we are in this weak and destabilized position every day and every time the president opens his mouth, frankly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's tariffs on practically everything now. Ever since the premiers went to Washington, he decided to slap tariffs on the digital services tax, the GST, and now, the auto sector. So every day there's a new threat of tariffs for sure. And frankly, I don't know if trying to appease him is the right way, frankly. I heard the premiers certainly Premier Legault and Danielle Smith actually agree on one thing. They think we should actually go ahead with the review of CUSMA right away. But, to your point, Jason, Quebec made it very clear that supply management should not be on the table. So, if we are to go with this early review of CUSMA, I don't think it's quite the solution, but I also think we'll see some sort of Hunger Games between the premiers, frankly, because no one is going to want to concede anything. So, right, I think force is certainly a good way to go about it. I think, we have to, put out a list, make sure that, different producers in the states realize that they will be hit with tariffs too, and so they can call the White House directly and complain to Donald Trump. I think that's the only way he'll actually listen. Last
minute or so to you, Emily.
I think we also need to realize that Donald Trump, by threatening to annex us, is in his head paying us a compliment, in the sense that you have places like Puerto Rico, who's been on the waiting list to become a state since the late 19th century. The ways in which Donald Trump is trying to absorb Canada is because of our shared culture and language with the United States. And so if we think that this is what's going to save us, that shared culture and language and proximity, it's actually what is making us his target. And so we need to get over the fact that because we know the Americans so well, they're our friends. We're a bunch of Austrian Adiva, basically the Anschluss, trying to think that because we both speak German, the Germans are going to be our friends. This is not the way it works. We would not be a target if we did not get along and knew and were friendly with the Americans so well. And I think that's the paradigm shift that we need to do in the next couple of weeks and months.
Before the tariff threats, we were talking about a carbon tax election. But now with these threats, I have to concede I've had to reflect on whether it is a top-of-mind issue. And after much reflection, I have concluded that the carbon tax will be an even bigger issue in the coming election than we thought.
Pierre Poilievre speaking at a Conservative Party rally in Ottawa yesterday, responding to media coverage suggesting this looming trade war with Donald Trump is derailing his party's messaging. What does all this mean for the federal election on the horizon? At some point, let's bring back our Sunday Scrum. Catherine Levesque, a parliamentary reporter with the National Post. She's in Ottawa. I believe she was at that rally yesterday, so we'll get the inside scoop from her. Yeah, Emily Nicolas, a columnist with Le Devoir in Montreal, and Jason Markusoff, producer, writer with CBC News here in Calgary. I'm going to start with Jason, though, because he didn't get a second go-round last time. I found that clip so interesting because certainly you can make the case that the carbon tax is more relevant, even though everyone's walked away from the consumer carbon tax. But the idea that Poilievre was sort of slapping back people who said he was changing his message while standing with a slogan in front of him that said Canada First, when normally it would say axe the tax or other things. I found that fascinating, that he was sort of denying a shift in messaging when it was very clear that that is what happened. And that's what they were trying to do yesterday, Jason.
The other thing that struck me about the difference with that message board, the placard in front of him, was that it was in red and white. Yes, they're Canada colors, but they're also Liberal colors. I mean, that's that's kind of the bizarre world thing we're starting to get used to. That, and hearing Mark Carney on your interview earlier saying that he was supposed to be the second finance minister under Stephen Harper. These are heady, different times now, the last 2 months have changed an awful lot, and certainly the polls are showing that. Certainly, the fact that Pierre Poilievre is even admitting that he's had to reflect. He's had to pause and think. This is a guy who's been on message, steady, repetitive for the last, 2 years now? Axe the tax, build the homes, fix something, axe other things, stop crime, I think. So the fact that he's had to change his message so profoundly, the fact that, of course, the carbon tax is a different beast now, if it's anything that he can really attack. Trudeau is gone. There's had to be a big, big change, and it's not just the color. His message has changed. His prospects of winning are changed. So I think he acknowledges that it changed everything. And he has to really change his carbon tax argument a lot too, in a really interesting way.
Yeah, Catherine, what was it like there? I mean, it appeared on TV, which is how I watched it, on my phone, that it was a big, successful rally and that they were really almost launching a campaign. I'm not sure I saw a real market shift in terms of what the Conservatives are going to put in the window, but give me your take.
Yeah, they're telling us not to call it a pivot, but certainly it is a shift, certainly, because, look, Pierre Poilievre is known to be a huge door knocker. I mean, I think he has less time now that he's leader, but he's usually ahead of the curve in terms of issues, and he certainly was in terms of affordability, the carbon tax, et cetera. But, insiders were telling us this week that he's also, one of his problems is he really wants to stay on message, and his message really he still wants to keep talking about affordability. So it was interesting to see how he tried to bring that affordability message into, fighting against Donald Trump, saying, giving a message to Americans and saying, look, if you go ahead with tariffs, I mean, consumers are going to be paying more at the pumps. People will have less money in their wallets. So he kind of gave a choice, and I think that, he successfully was able to pivot just to talk enough about Donald Trump to make sure that people were satisfied with this message. But certainly, I mean, he's not dropping the carbon tax anytime soon. I think it's still something that resonates with people, but a lot less. My colleague actually spent the afternoon talking to supporters yesterday at the rally. And frankly, even supporters were saying, look, we don't care that much about the carbon tax anymore. That's not their focus. And frankly, they were of the view that Pierre Poilievre should really, go away from that message maybe a little bit and really talk more about Donald Trump. And that's what he did.
Yeah, I read that article. It was pretty interesting. Emily, what did you make of we won't call it a pivot, a shift, a turn, however Pierre Poilievre wants us to call it. What did you make of the change that we saw yesterday?
First of all, what we've seen in the last month has been seismic. for Canada. And what we've seen Pierre Poilievre do is something, for example, when Stephen Harper just this week came out and say, Canada could be hurt. It's better in Canada be hurt but that to fight for Canada. I don't remember the exact quote. But
that we should be ready to take pain to defend Canada.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think there isn't anything that Stephen Harper says that is in line with what Pierre Poilievre says. Those two are obviously speaking. And it speaks to a realignment within the Conservative Party in terms of discourse. However, in terms of membership, there has been quite a chunk of the Conservative membership who were pro-Trump. And I'm really looking forward to see if those polls have, realigned or how in the next little while. For me, this idea that there are some people, especially within the Conservative basis in Canada, that is pro-Trump, it's making Pierre Poilievre's shift actually harder to do, in the sense that when it comes to discourse, waving the flag is one thing. Actually building economic policy that isn't about appeasement policy, and I'm very much using the vocabulary of British Prime Minister Hubert Chamberlain from the 1930s on purpose. But there's a risk of appeasement policies coming from a certain part of our political class. And for me, I will be looking for Pierre Poilievre's actual economic proposal. How do you want to build Canadian sovereignty and make sure that we keep it? Or are you actually putting forward an economic agenda which is about appeasing the demands of Donald Trump while waving the Canadian flag?
Yeah.
And are we going to be smart enough as Canadian and as Canadian journalists to call him out on it if that's what he's doing? Or if that is what Mark Carney is doing as well. I think that, to me, is the question.
Yeah, I mean, it sure sounded in his speech as though he is ready to get tough with Donald Trump. He talked about dollar-for-dollar tariffs. But I take your point, and Jason, I'll have you weigh in on that. There are lots of Conservatives who like Donald Trump. It doesn't mean that they like what he's doing and the approach that he's going to take, that he's been taking towards this country.
I'm not sure if Pierre Poilievre abandons, risks losing the people in his party who are pro Donald Trump, where are they going to go? Are they going to, go to the 1%, build up the 1% that the PPC, the People's Party currently has? I'm not sure. He realizes that there's that the public opinion has really changed. He was at the game, apparently. He must have heard the boos towards the national anthem, seen the rise in patriotism. Clearly, he's dropped the Canada is broken message from his speech rhetoric. In fact, the Liberals are now weaponizing that in ads, which is quite a striking thing to see them doing. Yeah. So he, I did when I heard his response about retaliation and pushing the idea in the States that it'll cost more. It's not. It's going to hurt, that's going to hurt them. I'm not hearing a whole lot of difference between them and the Liberals.
No, and that is the problem on this issue, right? That there's only so many different ways to distinguish yourself. So it becomes down to, do you buy that this person can actually do it? Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Catherine, Emily, Jason, nice to see all of you. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I hope you do something nice. Take good care.